You know, it's kind of wild when you think about it, how these really ancient philosophical ideas, like thousands of years old, can still sort of sneak into how we see things today, often without us even noticing. It's like this uh, whisper from the past,
Yeah.
still echoing. So today on the Deep Dive, that's our mission. We're going to explore a connection that might surprise you. We're linking ancient Gnosticism, warnings from the Apostle Paul, and yeah, even the movies and books we consume. And we'll use a daily devotional on First Timothy as our lens, kind of showing how these old challenges to belief just keep popping up again in new clothes.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
After Paul got out of house arrest in Rome, his big focus wasn't just spreading the message wider. It was making sure the churches already there were built on a correct foundation of truth. He really wanted them focused on God's purpose, not, human ideas or desires. And that's exactly why he wrote to Timothy down in Ephesus. He was worried about what he called confusing theological theories, these kinds of new speculative ideas about spiritual secrets, and also false religious legalistic teachings, making faith all about rules instead of a relationship. And even things like mystical phenomena, these odd personal spiritual experiences that claim to be divine, but really led people away from the core message about Christ.
Okay, so Paul's concerns weren't just like high-level theology then. It was practical. What exactly were these ideas he was up against? And how did they actually manage to chip away at something as fundamental as, well, believing in Christ?
Well, what's really interesting, or maybe kind of insidious, is how Gnosticism and its origins are still a bit murky, honestly, but clearly grew by sort of latching onto Christianity like a parasite.
Mm-hmm.
At its heart, Gnosticism basically said salvation comes through secret knowledge, gnosis, right?
Yeah.
Not through faith in Jesus. It often painted the physical world, our reality, as evil or some kind of trap, and you needed this hidden truth to escape it. But Paul was also fighting Jewish legalism on another front, that heavy emphasis on following laws and rituals perfectly as the way to God instead of relying on his grace. They seem different, Gnosticism and legalism, but ultimately both ended up shifting the focus away from Jesus being the unique Son of God. They offered alternative paths,
That's a really key point. And we see proof of this Gnostic stuff, right? Like the Nag Hammadi library found back in 45, a whole collection of these texts. And more recently, remember the Gospel of Judas showing up in the 70s. That directly fed into books like the Da Vinci Code. So what's the common Gnostic thread in stories like that?
Yeah, those narratives tap right into that Gnostic impulse, this idea that there's a hidden truth, something secret that totally contradicts the official story, the feeling that maybe the institutions are hiding something and only a special few have the real key. It's all about finding salvation or maybe enlightenment through special information, not just humble faith in who Christ is.
Okay, so if the core message is always kind of the same, challenging Jesus's unique role, pushing other ways to connect with the divine, then the question is, how does this ancient, I guess, root of doubt keep going? This tendency we have to make up our own myths. Because it obviously didn't just vanish centuries ago. It seems like it found new ways to grow, especially with modern media being so powerful. Paul's warnings to Timothy in 1 Timothy 1, verses 3 and 4, they seem spot on for today, too. He tells Timothy to command people not to teach false doctrines any longer or to devote themselves to myths and endless genealogies. Those endless genealogies, they weren't just family trees, right? They were often these really complicated, made-up systems of divine beings, like a whole spiritual hierarchy designed to replace God's actual revealed truth.
Exactly. And think about the Apostle John. He also served that same church in Ephesus after Timothy. He wrote his gospel and his letters for the exact same reason, to call out these Gnostic tendencies. He told believers, flat out, to test the spirits. He says in 1 John 4.3, basically, any spirit that doesn't confess Jesus isn't from God. That's the spirit of the Antichrist. It doesn't matter the country or the time period. The underlying goal is always there, subtly undermining the unique truth about Christ.
And this is where it gets, well, super relevant for us now. Gnosticism as a formal thing might have peaked a long time ago, but its root, that human tendency to doubt what God has actually revealed and then, create our own stories based on what we think, that never went away. Today, you've got amazing computer graphics, really compelling storytelling. Imaginative ideas can look incredibly real. Think about movies or books that subtly weave in Gnostic-like ideas, secret societies with hidden knowledge, or the idea that reality itself is a matrix we need to wake up from. Our sources really highlight how this can plant roots of complete unbelief in people's minds. It leads them to distrust and doubt God's revealed word, especially maybe if they're just figuring out what they believe.
Mm-hmm. And if you zoom out, look at the bigger picture, it seems like wherever God's true heart, his nature, his revelation is doubted or questioned, Gnosticism or something like it tends to show up. It's like a historical pattern. You can trace it from the very first doubt in the Garden of Eden to the Tower of Babel, through all sorts of idolatry, right up to Gnosticism hitting the early church. Ultimately, it's about humans looking for ways to salvation or understanding that feel satisfying to us, rather than trusting God's perfect way.
So it really makes you think, what does all this mean for you listening right now? Are you maybe unknowingly sort of absorbing distrust and doubt just by watching entertaining stuff, media that subtly echoes these ancient challenges? Or are you actively trying to discern, to understand God's true heart through the Bible itself? It's a pretty important question to wrestle with, especially in a world just packed with competing stories and narratives. What standards are you actually holding on to?